I'd like to introduce James Sommerville as part of our second episode of Meet the Maestro for our upcoming season with the Okanagan Symphony Orchestra. And it's very exciting that we get to talk with you, James. And is it James or Jamie? Because I've heard Jamie, but see James.
Yeah, I go by Jamie. Anyone who knows me calls me that. So
Okay, so we'll call you Jamie. If you want to look up and find out more about Jamie Somerville as a conductor and horn player, you will find him under James under Wikipedia. I'd like to start today by acknowledging that we are living, working, and playing music on the unceded traditional territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. And we're really grateful for the opportunity to do that. I know today, Jamie, that we have a few people that will be joining us a little bit later as we continue our discussions. And to start with, Burl, you are a super fan of the orchestra, and I'm wondering if you could give just a 30-second or so introduction of yourself to Jamie so that he can know a little bit more about you, and then I'll follow.
My name is Burl Itani. I've lived in Kelowna now for 55 years. My father played violin in the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra in the 20s and 30s. It was in the Pops concert. So one of the things I received as a Christmas present when I was 7 years old was a violin. And I played the violin for 10 years. And I play in an English handbell choir here in Kelowna with Nikki Atwell as our director.
Thank you. And I also know through secret channels, maybe one of them being Nikki, that you were the first person to renew your subscription this year and that you did the I Want to See It All 7 concert pack. So thank you very much. It's wonderful to have our supporters in the audience and especially musicians like yourself. And I'm Alexis Macmillan. I'm on the board of the Okanagan Symphony Society, and I'm also part of the Music Director Search Committee, which is a really exciting process, and especially getting to know amazing musicians and conductors like yourself, Jamie. And so as we start off here, what should we know, the people of the Okanagan here, know about you as a musician and conductor?
I grew up in a musical household, but not to the extent that Beryl did. I mean, my mother loved popular music. She wrote pop tunes. Do you remember Simpsons, the store? And I'm dating myself, but they used to have a songwriting contest, and my mother won the Simpsons songwriting contest. So there was music around in the house all the time, but I didn't really pick up an instrument. I played piano, I played guitar a little bit, but I didn't really learn an instrument and become serious about it until I was 11, I guess. And I went to a new school, picked an instrument, which was French horn. And the early part, much of my career as a performer has been as a French horn player, as a soloist and a chamber musician, played in a number of orchestras, opera orchestras and symphony orchestras. And then I was always interested in conducting. I mean, even back in high school, I studied it in undergrad and took a few courses here and there, and decided when I was in my early 30s, I suppose, that I was really kind of more and more drawn to it and more interested in looking into it as a possible career. So fast forward to now, I had 7 years as music director of the Hamilton Philharmonic. I've done a lot of guest conducting here and there, much of it in Canada, but all over the world. That brought me to the Okanagan last January, which then brought me to this process.
That was a fabulous concert in January, and that you both were the soloist horn player as well as the conductor. That's a really special thing for a musician and conductor to be able to do. Can you tell us a little bit more about when you started doing that and how that works?
Sure. I mean, I've been doing it for quite a while. A lot of your listeners may not know that as far as musical roles go, the role of the conductor is relatively new. I mean, even in Mozart's time into Beethoven's time, it wasn't a given that even in a big symphonic concert that you would have someone actually up there waving a stick or waving their hands. It would often be led from harpsichord or from the concertmaster chair. In the classical tradition, it's not that unusual. Having said that, it poses some challenges. Obviously, you need two hands to play a French horn, so I can't be waving a stick at the same time. And further, when a violinist, let's say, is leading, you can see the bow move, right? I mean, you watch a violin, you can see when the note starts, when the note finishes, when it's about to start. Wind instruments are a little harder to kind of lock in on for the orchestra, just to be together. So it provides a few challenges, and I think the thing is you have to pick the right repertoire. So when I was in the Okanagan, I did a Mozart concerto. Although there are complexities and subtleties, of course, to Mozart's concertos, but in terms of just getting them started and stopped, they're a little more straightforward than a lot of newer repertoire. So you have to pick your battles, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah, it was really interesting to be an audience member for that. And Maya, thank you for joining. Maya, do you want to give your 30-second introduction of who you are and your connection to the OSO?
My name is Maya. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with the OSO. And I had the pleasure of working with Jamie last year already because I was coordinating our chorus, and the chorus was part of that performance, and I sang in it as well. So that was really great. And it's great to see you again.
I'll start off with our questions and then I'll go to you, Burl, and then to you, Maya. One of the questions I have is that you've done a lot in Europe, on the East Coast of Canada, and in the US. What draws you to the West Coast now? What is it that made you interested in being a part of the OSO?
It's no secret what draws all Canadians to the West Coast. I remember I used to go pretty much yearly and play in a chamber music festival in Vancouver in my 20s. When I first started going, people told me, oh, the weather in Vancouver is terrible. The West Coast just rains all the time. And after, I think, my fourth year, having spent 2 weeks there every year and not having seen a drop of rain, I was like, I'm on to you people now. I know what you're doing. You're just kind of keeping it a secret from the rest of the country. I have friends and colleagues in the province and in the Okanagan specifically, and I love wine, good wine. And so that brings me, and it's a beautiful place. And to be frank, before the concert last January, I was not that familiar with the orchestra. It's a working relationship that you have to develop quickly. It's also a creative relationship. And then, of course, there are the relationships with the administration and the board and the audience, the community at large. And those things they all kind of create a culture around an orchestra. So as a guest, you never really know what that's going to be like, positive or negative, supportive or just kind of going through the motions. I went in just kind of with an open mind, and I was just so thrilled with really every aspect of the experience, except the weather, because it was freezing. But other than that, it was fantastic.
It's not that cold here in the winter generally, but we have our moments. So, Burl, what is your first question for Jamie?
Next to the French horn, what is your next most favorite instrument in an orchestra?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. There are certain musical sounds. So usually I think of the voice, especially like a soprano voice. There's something about a beautiful human voice that you can just hear a note, like you can just hear a beautiful singer sing a note. No context, no story, and it can just, like give you chills, and make the hair stand up in the back of your neck because there's just something that bypasses all of your rational thought and just goes right to the center. And I would say the instrument that does that the most for me in the normal symphony orchestra is actually the cello. It's partly the range, it kind of sits very much in the range of the male voice, I suppose. There's just something about a cello beautifully played that I find really is just like it just really grabs me when I hear it.
My grandfather played the cello, so I know what you mean. When you hear certain notes put together, sitting in the audience, I sometimes tear up just by the sound that comes through.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's something that we performers have to kind of keep that in mind because, of course, when we rehearse and when we practice and when we study, we think about a lot of details, rightly so, so whether that's tempos and harmonies and how things are put together and how they're balanced. All those things are very important. But we always have to remember that for the audience, there are moments when that's all you want or need. You know, there's just this one beautiful moment of sound, and I guess we have to remain grateful that we can do it and that we can provide that kind of joy. And then also sometimes just kind of let the sound speak for itself and not overthink it too much.
Maya, do you have a question for Jamie?
Yeah, you're sitting in front of a really nice piece of art. Do you have any ideas of how you may want to connect music with different forms of arts here in the Okanagan?
This painting was painted by a friend of mine, colleague, who's a great artist, who in fact happens to be a singer. Her name's Paula Arciniega. She's a gifted painter, and this painting is called Mahler 7. A lot of her output is large-scale acrylics and oils that are inspired in a metaphorical way, not necessarily a literal way, by works of music. I find that with all of the other arts, there are very important and clear points of connection with music. In some cases, it's more explicit than others. So, if you think about a piece like Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire, which is taken from verses written by a Belgian poet, but also reflects on the kind of carnival styles of Italy in the medieval period. A lot of composers like Schoenberg, like Mozart, like Beethoven, were very much inspired by, sometimes very directly, inspired by literature, inspired by painting. Ballet composers, Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky, and so forth, very much influenced by dance. I think more to the point in terms of what that means in artistic programming and within a community, any point of connection that arts groups can make within a community kind of lifts the tide for all the boats. You make that web of interconnections, and some of it's social, some of it's professional, but it also kind of just provides a lot of creative spark for whether it's a dance company or whether it's visual artists. But I think, finding those points of connection is very valuable, not just to kind of give you ideas for new pieces to play, but to kind of create this web within the community.
Thank you so much, Sue, for being able to join us. And I see in the program your name is both Susan and we call you Sue. So which do you prefer when people are talking with you?
I prefer Sue. And it's funny because it only was Susan for maybe my first 2 years of professional life. Anytime I put it in print, it goes Susan.
And Sue, you may recognize that I'm wearing a piece of Sue's art because Sue is also a visual artist. So can you give us an introduction in terms of who you are in connection to the OSO and maybe a little bit about your art?
Absolutely. I've been playing with the Okanagan Symphony for over 25 years. I've been playing violin since I was 2.5. I love being in the Okanagan area. When friends and I talk about where we would be if certain things in our career had taken a different turn. And I'm so excited of all the things that have put me in the Okanagan because I love playing in regional orchestras. Art came about because everyone assumed that my kids would also play violin or be a musician. And 2 lessons in with my daughter, and I was like, nope, there's no way I'm teaching my kids music. Sarah and I went to art school instead. We went to art classes. And actually, that's what triggered the art that Alexis is wearing. I started doing paintings. And then one day I was like, I ran out of wall space. So it was, okay, now we have to start painting on fabric so you can wear it.
Thank you, Sue. A great introduction. I also see we're joined by Elena, who's on the board with me and others. Elena, can you tell us and tell Jamie a little bit about yourself?
I started taking piano lessons when I was in grade school, and I attended my first symphony orchestra when I was in high school, and I've been hooked ever since. I just recently retired from a career in HR and mental health, and I joined the board, and I'm quite excited to be a part of all this.
What I'd really like to do is talk a little more, Jamie, about the upcoming program. And let me just put when that's coming up. Our upcoming program with Jamie as conductor will be on November 15th, Friday in Kelowna, on Saturday, November 16th in Penticton, and Sunday, November 17th is a matinee in Vernon. There's also a pre-concert chat that happens an hour before each performance, and that's a great time to meet the conductor and particularly Jamie. And there's also an open dress rehearsal on Friday. Jamie, can you tell us just a little bit about the program and what excites you about it? There's pieces I see that are about nature and some are about innovation and breaking barriers. How do you tie this all together?
I love this program. Your listeners may not know, but as part of this search process, a committee at the OSO came up with the programs. As the person who's going to be performing, you're always like a little, okay, I hope it's something I know and like. As soon as I heard what the program was, I was just like looking at all those pieces and being like, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh that's great, oh that's great, oh that's better. So I'm thrilled with the program. There was one piece that I was not familiar with yet, and that's Marie Alice Conrad's Northern Sunrise. And that's a beautiful short piece for strings. She's based in Edmonton. She's a really wonderful mid-career composer. She's written a lot for voices, and her music tends to be, Alexis, as you were kind of alluding to, very much inspired by nature, very much reflecting nature. So it's really been great getting to know her style. She writes in a very fluid, largely kind of gentle and very euphonious style. It's just very beautiful. Like she is really skilled at evoking in sound those visual and auditory and kind of temperature feelings of a spring morning in northern Alberta.
And then some of the other pieces that are being played, the Mendelssohn, Arlen, Saint-Saëns, and Beethoven. Are there some things that we should watch out as an audience?
You know, I think there's a bit of a theme, maybe not with every single piece, but there's a bit of a theme of home and either longing for home or thinking of home or being somewhere distant and remembering it. Mendelssohn's Hebrides Overture, Mendelssohn was a German composer, but he traveled fairly extensively throughout Europe, especially early in his career. And he went to Scotland, to the Hebrides Islands, and just fell in love with the landscape, how wild it was, and that kind of sear beauty that you see up there. So that inspired this overture. It's not attached to an opera or anything. It's just a self-contained piece. It's almost like a mini symphony and very dramatic and very, again, very evocative of a place. Beethoven's Second Symphony, we don't often think of this piece in terms of the natural world. However, it's interesting to me because he wrote it largely when he spent a summer outside of Vienna in Heiligenstadt. He used to go there a couple of times to just kind of get away from the city and get some peace and quiet. And I've been there, and it's just this lovely little quiet, now suburb downriver from Vienna. You can kind of see the vineyards. That's probably familiar to a lot of Okinawanites. See the vineyards kind of over behind the trees. The year where the piece was mostly written was an extremely difficult one for Beethoven. He was dealing with incipient deafness. He was having difficulties professionally and personally. The interesting thing is that he was very much a romantic, but not to the extent that every emotional state that went through his head just immediately went onto the piece of paper that he was composing. And so this piece, I would say, is much more informed by the beauty of the place he was and his hopes for better times and his memory of better times, because it's a very joyful and very personable work, very accessible.
And the cello concerto, the first cello concerto by Saint-Saëns, that's going to be a very exciting piece. I know it's some people's favorite cello concerto, might be one of mine.
You know, I think Saint-Saëns, just his skill as a composer, his ability to orchestrate and construct large forms, and especially his way with melody. I mean, he just writes such great tunes. I think he's probably fallen out of favor because He was never the most modern of composers. I mean, when he was writing pieces like the Cello Concerto, this was the time of Debussy and Mahler and Schoenberg, who were all writing very much more sort of modern, forward-thinking pieces. Saint-Saëns was just after beauty. He loved people, he loved society, he loved melody, he loved good food and wine, and his music reflects that. So it's a beautiful, beautiful piece, full of drama, full of big tunes, and I'm really happy to be doing it with Rachel. I mean, I've played chamber music with Rachel as a French horn player a number of times over the years. I was thrilled to see her name come up when the concert was organized because I was like, oh, great. I know it's just going to be simple and a lot of fun with Rachel. And of course, she's a brilliant, brilliant player.
Fantastic. And of course, we have the small piece of Over the Rainbow, which is some of the Wizard of Oz fans, that beautiful piece that we hear so much, and that will round out the program.
I was just looking at the lyrics again today. I mean, of course, I could probably remember them pretty much by heart, but in the movie, that's very much about, at the beginning, not so much about home, but about what could be out there. What great, beautiful places are there out there? Judy Garland's Dorothy finds out. Over the years, there have been so many versions that are actually very different. I mean, I think the most popular one is ukulele. That's the mark of a great tune, when you can do it in all these different styles and it's still beautiful.
I'll come back to our panelists here and get some more questions. Sue, what question do you have for Jamie?
What's triggering in my head is actually a bit about your conducting skill when you came last season. Instead of painting by numbers, it was more of when you get into the masters of painting that change the color of something instead of us. And I'm looking at your painting. It's not just one color of blue. Do you do visual art as well as music?
I enjoy photography, but it's a completely different craft. A few weeks ago, I had a layover in London, England, a long layover, and I went into the city from the airport. I went to the Tate Museum. They had this amazing exhibit of art by the Blue Riders School. And actually Schoenberg was part of the group, but they were very interested in this interconnection between the arts. They had this kind of manifesto book, The Blue Rider, and a lot of it is woodcuts and paintings and pictures, but there's also some music that Schoenberg wrote for this kind of, it's hard to know what to call it. Like, it's kind of like a club, but a very exclusive club of artists and musicians and dancers and writers who kept challenging each other, to kind of create new art forms and create like an art form which included everything. So I find that super inspiring.
Elena, do you have a question for Jamie?
I was thinking about this past season. I had invited two friends of mine to come to the symphony orchestra, and I was surprised to see that they were actually a little bit nervous. I was just wondering, Jamie, what kinds of experiences do you hope to create for both the audience member that loves music and is familiar with the symphony performance, and those who might be coming who I guess I could describe as orchestra curious?
I mean, one aspect of that, as you say, is people are nervous. They wonder, well, what should I wear? When should I clap? And are people going to shush me if I talk? And, those kind of things. It's a very common and understandable worry. About 7 or 8 months ago, I have a friend who plays in the Montreal Symphony who's big into heavy metal, loves heavy metal music. He goes to those like weekend things where you go to a park and there are 12 bands and you just sit there all day and try to remember to keep your earplugs in. So he invited me to a metal concert in Montreal, and I listened to the band and I liked it, but I was kind of like, I've never really been to a heavy metal concert. Like, are people going to be, moshing on top of me, and is everything going to be weird? And it was so fantastic in the end. I went, and it was a super positive crowd and very friendly and engaged. Not that much like the symphony orchestra experience, but in that way it was. I think concert going for anything, whether these days, whether it's Taylor Swift or a jazz club or symphony orchestra or a heavy metal concert, you just kind of go as yourself and you just enjoy. And mostly there's not a lot of pressure to kind of adhere to codes of standards. I don't get too kind of concerned about people clapping between movements. I actually think in a lot of cases it's fine. That listener habit is not that common in the history of music. I mean, people only started, I mean, really it was a couple of conductors kind of in the 1880s, 1890s, around there, when they just started to say, no, we have to hear this Mozart symphony front to back without anything but silence in between. There's something to that, but there's also something to, if you're listening to an intense 35 or 40-minute piece, to having a little moment, in between movements where you can kind of chill out, maybe talk to your companion about what they heard, what they didn't hear. So I think some of those habits are changing. I think the expectations for audience members have changed a lot. You don't really see a lot of suits and ties, never mind tailcoats at concerts anymore. In terms of, making a point of connection with the music, I'm very much of the mind that it helps to speak from the stage. That usually falls to the conductor. In some orchestras, they'll have someone walk out and give a little précis what you're about to hear, sometimes individual musicians. But obviously, whoever's standing up front, it's easiest. So I've done a lot of that. Just kind of explain a little bit about the context in which it was created, what the composer was after, what they were trying to transmit or make you feel. And that helps audiences a lot.
Burl, I'll give you the last official question here, because I know you said you had a couple, and so we'll get one more there and then we'll wrap up.
When you were talking about Over the Rainbow, you should hear the Alleluia Ringers play Over the Rainbow, a bell choir. It's absolutely incredible. Brought tears to everybody's eyes. My question is, what other kind of music do you like? And do you have any favorite composers or artists? I grew up with not only classical music, but Gilbert and Sullivan, and then a whole lot of other things as well. And so just wondered, what do you like?
I want to say, I find bell ringing, like the bell choirs, I find it blows my mind when I hear that, because it's like this whole genre and way of playing, I guess, of rehearsing and performing, that just seems amazing to me, like very exotic. I listen very broadly and I love all genres. I was speaking a little earlier about when I was young, and the music that was around our house was Gordon Lightfoot, Joni Mitchell, a lot of Neil Diamond, Captain and Tennille, 70s popular music. So that's sort of really way back there in my brain. I listen to a lot of jazz. I'm looking over at my record player and there's Charles Mingus and Pink Floyd, band Clutch. That was the heavy metal band I was telling you about. I've been going to a lot of concerts this year, some of them classical music concerts. I heard Kings of Leon, Pearl Jam, Roseanne Cash, Jason Isbell, Lyle Lovett. These are the live concerts I've been to in the last 6 or 8 months.
Thank you, Jamie. And it is the power of live music. And it's the thing that we talk about in the Okanagan, how just incredible it is that we have an orchestra with the caliber of musicians and conductors and guest soloists that come. What would you say to the Okanagan audiences, to the sponsors, the donors, the people like Burl who've been coming for a long time and enthusiastically looking forward to this year?
Beryl, I know I'm preaching to the bell choir, so I don't have to convince her. I mean, I would very much echo what you just said, Alexis, which is that it's so easy now to listen to recorded music. It's been easy through all of our lifetimes, but now it's like no further away than your phone, the whole library. So it can take a little bit to kind of convince oneself that there's that kind of value to going outside, going to the concert hall, paying the money and sitting down. But everyone who does it finds there's a quality to live music that it's impossible to put into a phone or, put on a turntable or whatever. You can't help but feel when you're there with all the other audience members around you and that big group of people up on stage. There's an energy that passes back and forth that there's no substitute for.
Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you everyone for joining. We're really looking forward to getting to meet you in person in November, and I really encourage the people of the Okanagan to come out not only to the concerts, but to the pre-concert chats and really take advantage of a world-class and Juno awarded musician and conductor. So really, this is an opportunity that you shouldn't miss. And thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you all for showing up.